In my mind, Supergiant Games stands as one of the foundational independent game studios. And while they achieved a lot of success early on with titles like Bastion and Transistor, with Bastion remaining my personal favorite of their games to this day, I believe the first Hades was their true breakthrough hit. Hey everyone, Lily here from PlayGridz. Today we're diving into Hades 2 to see whether or not it's worth your money. For my money, the original Hades is an undisputed classic and what I consider to be an absolute masterclass in the roguelike genre. It was no shock to me then when they launched their first ever sequel into early access back in May of 2024. Now, after about a year and a half, the 1.0 version of Hades 2 is finally here. I've poured time into it, and I won't mince words, I think this game is utterly fantastic. The first game is a masterpiece, and what this sequel tells me is that the team took every lesson learned from that experience and channeled it into a game that feels even more self-assured, improving on the original's formula in some incredibly intelligent ways. What I immediately found is that this game kicks off with a narrative hook that feels far more dramatic than its predecessors. This time, I wasn't just playing as the world's most stubborn runaway, I was on a mission of vengeance against the Titan of Time himself. As I see it, the Greek gods are embroiled in a massive conflict. Hades is imprisoned, and it became clear to me that my task was to rescue him and make the mad Titan answer for his crimes. It's a straightforward but deeply compelling premise that I watched unfold through punchy, well-crafted dialogue, and what I thought were brilliantly implemented flashbacks and playable memories that enrich the world. I've always felt this narrative style has been their secret sauce since Bastion, and I can tell you it still works on me completely. From my experience, the basic gameplay loop feels almost identical to the original, which is no bad thing. I'd start out in my home base, a bastion of sorts, where I'd chat with my allies and purchase upgrades. Once I had my affairs in order, I'd embark on my run. I found the structure to be a familiar journey through 4 unique zones, fighting my way through randomly arranged rooms, slaying enemies, and gathering boons from the gods, upgrades that I feel can fundamentally reshape how you approach a run. Each of these zones, I noted, ends with a climactic boss battle, all building towards the ultimate goal of fighting back to Tartarus to defeat Chronos and avenge my family. A typical run, I found, took me between 20 and 40 minutes, and I can assure you, in the beginning, survival is not something you should expect. Even with the randomized nature of every attempt I made, what became clear to me is that the game places a massive emphasis on tangible progression. In fact, I firmly believe Hades 2 offers a far deeper well of character improvements and home base expansions than the first game ever did. More importantly, I feel these new systems are designed to be more meaningful and satisfying. I was particularly taken with the new Arcana system, which let me unlock and equip cards that grant a whole host of powerful perks, though I was limited in how many I could use. To me, experimenting with these cards is infinitely more engaging than the previous game's upgrade paths, which I always felt were just boring, flat percentage increases. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of system I felt needed an overhaul. The Arcana system lets you acquire game-changing abilities like Death Defiance, which I saw save me from a fatal blow, or abilities that let me constantly regenerate mana for my special moves. As I got further, I was able to increase my Arcana capacity, which made me feel significantly more powerful over time. I just love that there's more strategic thought involved than simply watching numbers get bigger. I'm convinced the early game progression is a monumental improvement over its predecessor. My impression of Hades 2 is that you are in a constant state of discovery, always unlocking something new or being introduced to another layer of gameplay. The result I found is that even when a run ends in a crushing defeat, it never feels like you've been spinning your wheels. In my playthroughs, there was always a compelling new development waiting for me upon my return to the Crossroads base. On top of all that, I discovered you can tackle an entirely different path, which I think is a brilliant expansion. You're not just descending into the Underworld to confront Chronos. I learned there's a whole other surface world to explore, which contains another 4 zones, each with its own set of distinct bosses and dangers. From my point of view, the surface is unquestionably the more punishing of the 2 routes. At the start, I found that just setting foot there was a death sentence. What this new path does, I believe, is essentially double the game's content while also smoothing out the difficulty curve by presenting a more advanced challenge for players to aspire to. I also got the distinct impression that the developers have toned down the difficulty of the initial Underworld path. My feeling is that the bosses in the later stages of a run present less of a hard wall than they used to. Chronos is certainly a formidable foe, but I didn't find the other encounters to be quite as grueling. In my opinion, the boss design is incredibly fun, and I think they did a wonderful job ensuring these fights don't become a chore even after facing them repeatedly. For me, Scylla, the second zone's boss, was a constant highlight. She engages you in a musical battle, and I noticed her songs actually change between runs. She even has a drummer and a guitarist backing her up, which I found to be a super creative and enjoyable encounter. I'm thrilled to report that I never dreaded any of the boss fights here, which is a stark contrast to my feelings about the Minotaur and Theseus from the first game, a fight that, in my book, was just plain awful. So while the game's overall structure felt incredibly familiar, almost identical to the first, I found the moment-to-moment experience of playing it to be quite different. I believe this is entirely due to the new protagonist, Melinoë, and how she controls. In addition to her standard attacks, I saw she has a magic cast that creates a circle to slow enemies. I'll admit it doesn't seem very useful at first, but I discovered that with the right boons, it can transform into an absolutely devastating ability that can be the cornerstone of an entire build. This time, I also had to manage a mana bar. My attacks have more powerful Omega versions that I found consume mana to use. There are also ultimate abilities that I learned require you to spend a certain threshold of mana in a fight to activate. When I factored all of this in with the game-changing boons, like ones that modify attacks at the cost of total mana, I felt the game gave me so much more to consider in the heat of battle. For me, the combat feels a bit slower and decidedly more strategic. I noticed I was relying more on long-range magic, and the weapons generally felt like they had more reach than in the first game. While there are a couple of close-range options, it was my observation that 4 of the 6 total weapons let me keep a safe distance. The combat still feels just as tight and responsive as the original, which is a massive relief because it's what you spend most of your time doing. When it comes to level design, my assessment is that they didn't deviate much from the established Supergiant formula. It feels to me like they are largely sticking to what worked so well before, while just adding a few new ideas to keep me on my toes. They do, however, like to throw a few curveballs. I was pleasantly surprised to find the third Underworld zone is composed of wider, more open spaces, which felt like a breath of fresh air to me. The first couple of surface zones also changed things up with what I saw as a more nonlinear structure, but at its heart, my experience was still about choosing a door, clearing out enemies, and claiming my reward. In my view, this is a game that is all about refining and polishing its existing systems, not tearing them down and starting over. And I think that's a very good thing because those systems were already fantastic. Another area where I feel the game has been refined is its art direction, which I believe is somehow even better than before. To my eyes, the character portraits and background art are simply lavish, filled with incredible detail. The music, the user interface, the whole presentation, I think it's all superb. I have a strong suspicion this is due to the budget. It seems obvious to me that the staggering success of the first Hades gave them the resources to polish every single facet of this sequel to a brilliant shine. I feel the confidence of this team is on full display. Their take on the Greek pantheon continues to fascinate me, and I'm impressed by their ability to balance lighthearted humor with the inherent power and mystery of these gods. They aren't just one-dimensional jokes. I found the game to be genuinely funny, which I think can only be achieved with truly strong writing. And in my opinion, the voice actors are all delivering phenomenal performances to sell it. It's quality through and through. If I have to say anything negative about Hades 2, and I'm not sure this even qualifies as a negative, it's that it's a pretty safe sequel. To me, that isn't a criticism. I think people who love the first game and simply want more of it will be perfectly happy with what's here. In fact, I believe that even some people who had issues with the original might prefer this one, because I found the progression in the early game to be significantly smoother. I also personally feel the game does a better job of dolling out its story and world-building details. Furthermore, I found myself preferring some of the new weapons, and I believe the boons offer more exciting and creative synergy possibilities, though I admit that's a matter of personal taste. I must say, however, that if you are just fundamentally opposed to the roguelike structure of trying, failing, and trying again, my opinion is that this game will not change your mind. This is the nature of the genre, and the gameplay is still laser focused on isometric combat. Let's be clear, Hades 2 doesn't break the mold or reinvent the wheel. I believe a valid argument could be made that the game is not particularly innovative. Maybe if Supergiant had waited and developed something else before coming back to the Hades formula, this wouldn't be as apparent, but they went directly from one to the other. And as a longtime fan of their older titles that were each so completely different, I can see how some might find that a little disappointing. But I am one of those fans of their old games, especially their very first one, Bastion. In my honest opinion, Hades is the best game they've made since Bastion. So, if you view this as a complaint, you should know that it's a very minor one coming from me. By any metric I can think of, I believe Hades 2 is an excellent game with an enormous amount of content to explore, what feels like basically double the amount in the original. And I see that as a very good thing. I'll concede there might be a few too many crafting materials to keep track of. And I found the new hot springs feature to be a place where no one ever wants to hang out, but aside from those tiny issues, I have nothing but praise for Hades 2. In my experience, the new weapons are mostly a joy to use. I find the new zones to be visually stunning, and when they introduce unique gimmicks, they aren't overly annoying or detrimental to the game's flow. The enemies are generally fun to fight, and I think the new 3D models, particularly for the bosses, look absolutely incredible. I feel they successfully capture the essence of the 2D character art, and the game provides just enough story progression to keep me engaged, even when I wasn't making much headway. For me, the brilliance of Hades 2 is how it's a roguelike that has the heart of a traditional linear game. I always felt I was growing in a meaningful way, whether I was unlocking new activities at my base, acquiring a new weapon, or earning some other reward. And even when I wasn't getting major unlocks, I still felt like I was gaining something from every single run. I never once believed my time was being wasted here, a feeling I often get from other roguelikes. Still, I must emphasize that the core of the game is delving into randomized areas to collect upgrades. So, if you simply cannot abide by that level of randomization, then I just don't think the Hades formula will ever work for you. However, I've personally heard from people who pushed through their dislike of the genre simply because they fell in love with the characters and story of the first game. And if that sounds like you, then I'm confident you'll love what they've done here too. In my view, it has all the same charms as the original, as well as the same general drawbacks, though I feel some of those have been lessened. The first Hades was a cultural phenomenon. It won countless Game of the Year awards and was the talk of the town for a long time. So, at this point, you likely already have a good idea if you're gonna like Hades 2. My question to you is this: did you like the first game? If so, then I think you'll like this one. In my opinion, it's the same experience, but bigger and better. If Hades had been merely a decent game, that wouldn't mean much, but I consider it one of the best indie games ever made. Therefore, making a slightly improved version of that masterpiece, to me, absolutely makes this game of the year material. So, I think it goes without saying that it's a recommend from me. I think you will absolutely enjoy this game if you're a fan of the genre, the developer's previous games, or whatever. I believe it's worth a try one way or the other, and it's not an expensive game either. It's $29, at least on Steam, and I'm sure it won't be long before it's on sale. Seriously, Hades 2 is great, but that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Leave a comment below to let me know. See you soon.